Good evening, and thank you for joining this webinar presentation by the National Catholic Educational Association, brought to you in partnership with Sadlier, 21st Century Evangelization, Igniting the Catholic Imagination of the School Community. I'm Andrea Kopp, Assistant Director of Professional Development with NCEA, and I'm happy to be your moderator and your host this evening. Just a few housekeeping notes as we get started. Please note that your microphone connections have been muted. If you have questions or comments during today's presentation, please send those through the chat box that appears in your GoToWebinar control panel. To ask a question, use your mouse to click into the blank box area, type your question using your keyboard, and then click Send. The webinar presentation will last about an hour, and there will be opportunities for questions and answers. You can post your questions or comments for the presenter at any time. We'll also be live tweeting during the webinar tonight, so you can join the conversation by using the hashtag NCEA webinars, and be sure to tag NCEA Talk and Sadlier Religion. Immediately following the webinar, you'll be prompted to complete a brief survey about your experience, and we thank you in advance for providing us with this valuable feedback. You will receive an email tomorrow with instructions on accessing this recording, the presentation materials, and your certificate of attendance. You can also download those files during the webinar from the handout section of your GoToWebinar control panel. It is now my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Robert Rabe. Robert is the Director of Evangelization and Catholic Identity in the Office of Catholic Schools in the Archdiocese of Chicago. Welcome, Robert, and thank you so much for being here tonight. Will you please lead us in prayer?
Yes, Andrea, and thank you for introducing me, and thank you to everyone joining us this evening. So to begin with, I've chosen a prayer that I'm going to ask that we all say together. And if you look at it on your screen, it says you with a comma, and that's where you're supposed to say your name. And we'll say this prayer together, which goes on to the next slide, and we'll complete that prayer at that point. So if we can place ourselves in the presence of God and begin in the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen. You are holy and sacred and utterly unique. There are gifts you were born to give, songs you were born to sing, stories you were born to tell. And if you do not give it, the world will simply lose it. It is yours alone to offer. No one can give it for you. And dear friend, listen, because this is important. This wounded world needs all the songs we can pull from the air, every story that helps us to remember. It needs every single gift, large and small. And yes, his grateful world does rejoice every courageous time we are true to ourselves and our gifts. Embrace the song and the story and all your gifts, because the world has such great need, and because the world exceedingly rejoices, and because there is no sadder thing than to leave this world having never really shown up. St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, awaken us to our gifts. St. John Baptist de La Salle, empower us to sing our song. All holy leaders and educators, ignite us to tell our story, and we all say, Amen. So I'd like to welcome you this evening to the webinar and express my deep humility and joy and excitement to share a little bit of what I've learned as a teacher and administrator, and now in my new role around 21st century evangelization. I look forward to spending this next hour with you, and I look forward to entertaining any questions or ideas that you have throughout the webinar. And hopefully we'll find this to be a fruitful opportunity of true learning, understanding, and ways to strengthen the Catholic imagination, the sacramental imagination in our schools. So I entitled it 21st Century Evangelization because I think we have to look at the context in which our schools operate now. We have to look at what does the 21st century world look like, because our students and our faculty and staff bring that into our schools, into our classrooms, and into our lives. And so I want to provide at the outset of this webinar, before we get to real practical ideas, I want to provide kind of like a theoretical, theological base for this presentation regarding our understanding of Catholic education. So I begin with this statement. It's an old Chinese proverb, and it says, "May you live in interesting times." And when I first heard it, I thought, oh, that is really interesting, and I kind of interpreted it as a blessing. But as I looked at the etymology and the root of it, I came to realize that actually this was a curse. This was something that people said to each other if they wanted to kind of wreak havoc upon your life, or they were wishing ill will towards you. And so I choose this as the quote because I think we live in interesting times. It's very interesting. And I think in this time, we would love if everything were very linear, and our ultimate desire is just to move forward. If there was clear vision, a clear understanding of where we're headed as Catholic schools, we want that. That's our desire. However, I think this is our reality. We live in a very complex world with multiple moving parts that we're trying to understand specifically within the context of Catholic education and what our role and mission is in this world. We find ourselves in a context, of increasingly secularization of the culture and a less not less desire, but less affiliation with organized religion. More statements like, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. And so we're asking ourselves, how do we live in that reality? I think the second piece of that is we realize we live in very much polarized times. We're seeing high extremist attitudes, inability to have conversations around the table about differing and diverging beliefs, and yet all that comes into our classroom. And I think it's our job to try to understand what does that mean. But I make this claim, and I think this is important. This has always been our story, trying to create out of chaos. Our God, our great divine artist, took stardust and sand and all kinds of things from the earth and the reality of life to create the earth, the heavens, the galaxies, and all that exists. It was out of chaos that the very world that we live in developed by the hands of our Maker. And so we're no different than any other time. We're just discerning our direction as Catholic schools. What do we look like in the 21st century? So in the description of this webinar, I quote a Pope Francis. And Pope Francis has some pretty insightful statements in many of his documents, from the Gospel of Joy to Amoris Laetitia and all the other infinite and amazing writings he's produced. But there's one that has stuck with me. And I read it, I don't remember exactly how many years ago, but I read it, and Pope Francis said that Catholics often look like they're coming from a funeral. And so I have the image of funeral up there, kind of Visio Divina, coming from a funeral. And he was illustrating that there seems to be a lack of joy in Catholics. They don't look like they're joyful or on fire or excited to be Catholic or to be in love with the church and the sacraments and Jesus Christ. But he says, we can't look like a funeral. We must look like a party. And so he has this great quote that I'm going to read here. And I think it's just an awesome quote that he says. He says, "A Christian is one who is invited to join in the feast, to the joy of being saved, to the joy of being redeemed, to the joy of sharing life with Christ. This is a joy you are called to a party." So I'm going to go back to this slide, and I'm going to give you 30 seconds. I want you to think to yourself, does your school, does your classroom possess that joy? Does it look more like we're hosting a funeral or a party? Think about that for a few seconds. So we must host a party. And what I mean by a party is that people who are excited about their faith and want to share it with future generations and really want to teach future generations about the beauty and richness of our Catholic tradition. So the mission of Catholic education, as you already know, but I think it's important to continually reiterate for ourselves, is to evangelize, to create disciples, to spread and preach the good news. Jesus says, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations." And he says, set the earth on fire with the saving message of Christ. Set the earth on fire. And that is the gift of Catholic education today. We can set our children's hearts on fire with a deep love of the Catholic Church in Jesus Christ. So I was at a conference a few weeks ago, and I was particularly struck by what the presenter said was the role of the Catholic educator, the vocation of the Catholic educator. And he said, I put it in my own words, he said to create the encounter with Jesus where every child and adult in the community realizes God's dream for them. I want to say that again. Realizes God's dream for them. Again, it's that joy we're talking about, that Pope Francis talks about. When those children or those adults come into our school or in our classrooms or our parents visit, do they see the joy? Do they sense the joy? And do you see your vocation as helping each person in your school building realize God's dream for them? When I heard it, I thought to myself, wow, every day if I got up and I said that to myself, that would help me recommit to what I'm doing as the director of evangelization and Catholic identity. So I look at our Catholic schools building on this image as a fiery kiln. You know, it's a fiery kiln. I don't pretend to know a lot about pottery and making pottery and firing pottery, but I know a kiln, and a kiln, when you put a piece of pottery in there, it pulls out beautiful colors, it glazes it, it makes it resplendent, shiny, and glorious. I'd like to think that that's what a Catholic school does for people who visit the school, people who are there, who teach, educate, and the kids who come to us. We fire them. We fire and call out all that is beautiful in them, that was created by God. So there's a great passage, which many of you probably already know, when disciples are encountering Jesus on the road after his resurrection, and they don't know who it is. And at one point, they realize that it's the Christ. And they say, were not our hearts burning within us while he spoke to us on the way and opened the scriptures to us? Were not our hearts burning? That's what we want our schools to be. And we're schools where we can talk about God all day long and celebrate our faith and witness to the world. Were not our hearts burning when we spoke to him on the road? One of my favorite saints, really founder of Catholic theory around pedagogy and teaching, St. John Baptist de La Salle, says, the young are a letter which Christ dictates to you, which you write each day in their hearts, not with ink, but by the Spirit of the living God. So the young are our parchment that we write on. And again, I'm just trying to give us a context. We'll get to really practical ideas about how to create the Catholic imagination, the culture, and strengthen Catholic identity. But I want us to have that bigger, broader context about our call and what the mission and call of Catholic education is. I want you to take about 30 seconds to read this quote. How cool is it that the same God that created mountains and oceans and galaxies looked at you and thought the world needed one of you too? I put this in the presentation because I want you to understand that this great and loving God has called you, created you, and saw a necessity for you in this world and in Catholic schools to carry on and actualize that mission. That we can't do it without you. You are needed. Our God saw that need. And so I hope you can hold on to that you're needed to help the children realize God's dream for them. If you're an administrator, you're there to help your faculty realize God's dream for them, because the world needed one of you too in the midst of its amazing and beautiful galaxies, lands, and oceans. So we were talking about the 21st century context, but I think it's important, since we're talking about Catholic sacramental imagination, to unpack Catholic and the idea of sacramental imagination. So when we look at the word Catholic, it means universal. And so we're talking about, when we talk about Catholic, we're talking about a universality of life and experience. What I love about the term Catholic is it implies that all is connected, that we're all brothers and sisters to one another in faith, that God, who saw that we were needed in this world, designed us to be in relationality with all people in this world, both the living, the deceased, and the yet to come. So we are one holy and apostolic family, and helping our schools see, our students, our faculty, that we are brothers and sisters on this journey, shows us that deep connection. Because one of the defining features of Catholic schools, I believe, having taught for 11 years in a Catholic school before becoming an administrator, is the unique and wonderful relationships that kids and parents and faculty members have, and the deep level of compassion, care, and concern for one another. So that's a Catholic piece, a universality of connection. Talking about the sacramental imagination. So part of what I deeply am passionate about in the Catholic Church is that we believe in sacramentality, specifically in our 7 sacraments, but the sacramentals in life, being able to see God revealed in the tangible, the everyday. I mean, we're people who love imagery. We love symbols. We love bread, water, wine, oil, incense. We love to employ those because God has helped those become portals of connection for us. So to have a sacramental imagination in our school is to invite everybody to see God revealed in everything that happens, even in the struggles or the individual that we struggle in terms of our relationship. The challenge always is can we see that? So I had to share something I did with some of my students when I was a high school teacher. So I love the season of fall. It's my favorite time. I just love all the colors. I love the crisp, cool air, all the wonderful things that come with fall. And so I have been talking to my students constantly about, I want you to see God in everything that you do, everyone you meet, and everything you see. And so I wasn't sure they were getting my point. So one day I stood up and I said, get to the window, get to the window. And the students were looking at me. They thought I was a little crazy. I kind of was. I said, all the students need to go to the windows in the classroom. So we're standing over by the windows, and I say to the students, can you see it? Do you see it? And they're like, see what? And I go, do you see the beautiful red, burning red colors and the yellows and the oranges? That burnt red that possibly is the red that Moses saw in the burning bush, the one that called him to set God's people free? Do you see that? Because that's what's happening every single day in your life. God is speaking to you. And that is our challenge. How do we get the people we work with and we minister and we teach to see that God is speaking to them even in the most mundane and ordinary experiences of life? Sacramental imagination helps us to see the dignity of each person, that each person is valuable because God saw that they were good and that they were needed in our world. All creation bears the mark of the Creator. Everything that we see in creation is a part of the divine artist's plan. So, bigger kind of picture, when I'd like to look at this, bigger picture item here, I'd like to look at the idea of alignment, that Catholic schools are trying to get their individuals who are committed to Catholic education to align their worldview and their perspective with the very essence and impetus of the divine artist. So we want our people, ourselves, to see the world as God sees it. Good, beautiful, holy, even in its brokenness. So we're there as administrators and teachers to help align that school mission, our people, our students, our parents, with the divine artist mission, idea, and impetus in our world. So this is where I'm going to move into more practical. And so I want to look at what are three key areas that I think if we work on these, work, I'd say diligently on these, that I believe we can transform Catholic school culture to a culture of deep sacramental imagination. So we're going to look at three areas here: religious instruction and formation, cross-curricular learning known as STREAM, and then virtue formation. I believe these are the three pillars that if we incorporate them well as a cohesive whole, can transform our schools and our school culture. I think these are the three pillars that are ultimately going to attract parents and students to our schools, because we have something so beautiful to offer that can't be found in any other school. How I'm going to look at these, just to say this, I'm going to look at each one. What did it look like yesterday? What's it look like today? And how can we respond to it? So this is where you probably want to have pen and paper or something like that if you want to jot down a few ideas. But this will also be available to you, as Andrea said, this PowerPoint. So let's look at religious instruction formation. Now look at this image. I bet this looks just like your classroom or school. Sister in full habit, kids sitting there just very, very enthusiastically listening to sister, very organized classroom. This is what it looked like yesterday, or this is what we're told it was looked like yesterday, or romanticize it to look like. Sister in the full habit, with the kids being very obedient, looking enthusiastic to learn, right? Now I didn't include a picture here, but I'm going to tell you our classrooms look the exact opposite of that. As I said, 11 years of teaching and then in administration, I learned that schools are chaotic, and it's trying to learn how do we work, as we started this webinar, how do we work in the chaos to create a cohesive vision and whole within our schools. So I think, and many people think, our Pope thinks, we have to repropose the gospel. We have to rethink how we're offering the gospel message to our young and to our families. And we have to move beyond the traditional textbook. Textbooks are good. I love textbooks. But we have to move beyond the textbook and realize that the actual text is the student's life. The student is the parchment. Their story is the textbook. And it's how do we get them to see, align, understand their story and relationship to a God who loves them beyond belief. We must enculturate, be very aware that we live in a very diverse world and that there's a diversity of means to communicate the gospel. So we should always be asking ourselves whether we're conducting or facilitating a faculty meeting, whether we're leading a class in theology or language arts, we should always be asking ourselves, am I tapping into various cultures and various stories in this classroom? That way I can ignite them. We've got to use the language of our young, and as it says, become living parchment that heralds the redeeming love of God. Living parchment that heralds the redeeming and liberating love and action of Christ. So it doesn't look at all what it used to look like. So this is what I want to talk about religious instruction and formation. I have some ideas here, and I'm going to share some examples. As I said, I was primarily in a high school, although our Archdiocesan Catholic school system that I work for now, it's majority grade schools. It's roughly 180 grade schools, and altogether we have 214 Catholic schools. So anything I present here, I'll try to scaffold in such a way that we can connect it either to lower grade levels or higher grade levels. So I want to talk about prayer first. I think prayer often looks pretty rote in our classrooms. It's just kind of what we do. Okay, kids, name of Father, Son, Holy Spirit, our Father who art in heaven, we go through it, say amen, or we do some intentions. What are our kids' intentions? But what we're failing to realize is if we differentiate instruction, and if we realize there are multiple intelligences or multiple learning styles, there's various words that we could put around it, wouldn't there be multiple formation styles or multiple prayer styles that would speak to each child differently? So it's not that saying an Our Father is not a wonderful, beautiful thing to do, but I want us to start thinking, we begin class with prayer, start thinking, how can I use more music? How can I use traditions within our church? How can I encourage meditation or reflection on the gospel? It's more work, but I think it's much more meaningful for our students when they experience the diversity of prayer styles that exist in our church. I can't tell you how many times I hear people say, I've left the church for spirituality. I'm going elsewhere. The church doesn't have spirituality. And I'm like, we have a plethora of prayer styles and spiritualities. It's our job to unlock those for individuals. So I'm going to give you an example of something I did that was non-traditional. It was in a high school, and it really, the students loved it and the parents loved it. So I decided that, students listen every day to their music. They love music, okay? They're not listening to religious music every day. So I decided, what I'm going to do? I'm going to have them choose a song that they love. Any song, it had to be appropriate, of course, and appropriate content. And they had to choose that song, and they had to write a 4-paragraph reflection on it. And it was, how do they connect the song to themselves? How do they connect the song to the class? How do they connect the song to God? And how do they connect the song to our Catholic Church? So they had to write this reflection. And I had told them, I said, you cannot use a religious song or one that says God in it. And that was very important to me, because we can always hear God in the religious songs. They then had to sign up for a day where they stood in front of the class, they did intentions, they played their song, and they only read like a snippet of their reflection, like a line from it. Because I wouldn't allow them to read it directly, because that would bore the students. So this was very powerful, because it was making them look at what I listen every day to could be a revelation of God, or I have to look at it and see it in a different way. And I get that that's high school, but that's certainly, you could look at, having small groups in 5th grade. 5 kids decide on a song they really like. Why do they like it? How do you see God in it? Have them formulate that. Have them write a paragraph about how the song connects, and they share that with the class each day for prayer. So just kind of thinking outside that box in terms of prayer style, because that's how we begin our classes. So that's kind of the window in for our students. A second piece I want to offer here is the idea of alternative assessments. Developing faith formation portfolios. I'm a deep lover of faith formation portfolios. In the last high school I was at, I had to start implementing them freshman year through senior year. And this can be done 1st grade through 8th grade to pre-K through 8th, however you would like to do it. But I wanted them to somehow come up with a journal where there were certain rubric items they had to submit to this every single year. And we did it electronically because we were a one-to-one school. They had to submit every year, and they were consistent items or consistent outcomes, consistent activities. So that way, over the years, they could look back, and we could look back, and parents could look back and say, look where my child was in 3rd grade, and look where they are in 8th grade. So I'll give you a couple examples of what you would put in there. One is, you could have a 2nd grader write, what do you believe in? It's a personal creed. Every year, you have students write a creed. What do they believe in? You could do every year, what is my image of God this year? And that could be, maybe I color a picture for the younger grades. It could be the older grades, it's something I pull off the internet. You could be very creative. Maybe my image of God, I write poetry, but I expand that. And so each year I get to look at my God image. And the third piece you could put in there, and there's many more pieces that I could share, and I have my email at the end of the webinar page, is around works of mercy. So how am I living out my faith in terms of living out the corporal and spiritual works of mercy? This is a wonderful tool, and we could add all sorts of things to it, which we would. It's a wonderful tool, as I said, for kids to look at their faith development, for parents to look at their faith development. It's also a wonderful tool to use in promoting your school and saying our kids grow in faith, because faith's hard to measure, right? But when you have a portfolio with clear rubrics, it can be much easier to say, we see some growth here. So moving beyond that, like I said, I can offer more information about that. Integrate cooperative learning projects, and I'm going to connect this to the other one, problem-solving skills. Students, as you know, love to work in groups. Sometimes they're very hard to keep on task, and that's why a lot of teachers and administrators don't use it sometimes because it's far more, you have to be far more supervisory with your students. And so this is a wonderful opportunity for, I'll give you a quick example. You read a gospel passage and you have students get together as a group and rewrite it in a 21st century world. Then you have them act it out, which many of us done skits. This is a perfect opportunity to say, hey, there's this problem. If it's a problem at school, it's a problem in our world. Hey, we have a large problem with hunger. So this year in Chicago, we're really focusing our schools on hunger. So what can we do as a group to solve hunger? Or here's another problem. You know when you do something, you keep doing it over and over again, you know you shouldn't do it? Why do you keep doing that? And what sorts of things can you as a group come up with, say this will support me in making good choices? So there's a variety of ways to use that, but cooperative learning is really proven to really grow capacity in students' cognitive and affective realms. Use relevant cultural artifacts. So cell phones, technology, popular media, shows they're watching, all of that. And it could be shows that they're watching that you really feel are inappropriate, but if you can reference them and say, but why is that inappropriate? And try to give them an alternative, that's where it meets. That's where true learning meets, when you can reference where they are. So I one day I was with students, and it depends on your school's cell phone policy. One day I was with students, and we were in class, and we were talking about the experience of relationships and people who support us. I was like, you know what we need to do? And we were able to have our cell phones, so you might not be able to do this, but you can do it in a different way. We're going to get out our cell phones, and we're going to text someone that we love. And we're going to tell them that we're praying for them in theology class, that we love them, and thank you for all the support they've given us. And the students were like, this is kind of odd. And I'm like, no, we need to do this right now. Let's use our phones for good and tell someone how much we love them. That could be as simple, if phones aren't there, it could be simple as, why don't you write a quick note to someone you love, and you're going to deliver it this evening to them. And then I don't want to talk about other academic disciplines because I'll get there. But I also want to say young people today love the radical nature of the gospel. They love that Jesus stood outside the norm. And I think there's a lot of win that we can use in that radicality of this man who loved everyone, who loved those on the margins. Because if you think about it, our young struggle with self-esteem and their own issues, and many of them feel on the margins. And what a great man to have an encounter with, our Christ, to have an encounter with, to understand that you are loved. So those are some practical ideas there. I'm going to move on to cross-curricular learning in light of the time. We're moving through the webinar rather quick. I put this picture here because I don't know if some of you know, some of you may not know. At one time, the majority of textbooks in our schools were written by Catholics. So there's kind of the old joke, you know, the math textbook said, so if you pray one decade of the rosary today, and you pray 3 on Friday, and 1 on Monday, how many decades have you prayed, and how many Hail Marys have you said? You know, that's the kind of equations we're talking about in math. We don't have that anymore. You know, we don't have the nuns and the traditional habits. We also don't have always that neat and orderly classroom where the kids are always attentive, nor are all of our books written by Catholics. So we really have to look at this concept of stream. And the idea that we're not STEM, we're not STEAM, we're stream schools. So we have science, technology, religion, engineering, the arts, and math. But what I love about this image is religion is at the core of who we are. And religion cannot be a subject that's taught for 30 minutes a day. It has to be infused throughout the entire academic curriculum in the school, the entire academic program, whether it's pre-K through 8, high school, or beyond. That's what's going to make us unique, that we can infuse that. So I want to give some possible ideas. These ideas are probably higher level in terms of the language that I'm using around this, but we can certainly scaffold them in such a way that they can be applicable to younger children, even in the primary years. So I took on 2 ideas. I'm taking on the Beatitudes, and I'm taking on forgiveness. So the day is, the religion lesson is focused on the Beatitudes. That's what it is. And it's all about how do you live the Beatitudes and how do you integrate them into your life. And then we decide we should share that message out with our grade level team members or with other people we work with, because we want everybody to be talking about Beatitudes today. Now, it might be unrealistic to think we could do it every day, but perhaps the school could say, on Mondays, we really focus on cross-curricular learning that spirals around the idea that's being taught in religion that day. So the idea is beatitudinal living, right? So let's look at the science portion of this. Recognize the Beatitudes as key to sustained life and environment. And I put Laudato Si. So the whole idea, and again, I know some of the language is lofty, but the whole idea is that Laudato Si on Care for Our Common Home by Pope Francis calls us to be stewards of the earth. And that's what the Beatitudes call us to. How are we called to be a steward of creation in a world where we see surmounting issues with our environment? And connecting that beatitude to that. So looking at what are some of those environmental issues and how does Laudato Si and the Beatitudes speak to that in our call as disciples, intentional missionary disciples. So that's your science. Your technology is synthesize ways that technology can enable us to reach out and respond to the blessed. So how can our technology become an opportunity, first of all, to symbolize, to embody the Beatitudes, but also reach out to those who embody them too, or those who are on the margins of society? If we go to engineering, generate a plan of mechanisms that lead to and assist peaceful coexistence. So what sort of system can we put in place, or what needs to be in place that creates an overall mechanism that supports peaceful existence? And looking at it from engineering. And then we go to the arts, construct a 21st century rendering of Jesus preaching the Beatitudes. So think about that. So that could be a child coloring a picture, it could be someone writing a poem, it could be someone painting, it could be pottery, it could be whatever, but let's construct something that teaches us about the Beatitudes through the arts. And then finally, for math, it could be assess how can we divide our abundance fairly and justly. So if we know there's this much food in the world, what do we need to do so that everybody else has food? So that's one possibility. And so I'm going to talk on forgiveness now, because I know time is moving along. Let's look at forgiveness here. So the lesson of the day is examine our pathway to loving our enemies. So this is our lesson. How do I love our enemies, and how do I forgive them in such a way that we live in right relationship together? So we look at that as a science piece. It's explain the physical world's ability to perpetually regenerate. So my statement there, perpetually regenerate, can just really be broken down into, it's amazing how the world keeps recreating itself and even responds to its own brokenness, or as we were saying before, environmental deprivation that's happened to it, or abuse. And look at how it recreates, and look how it doesn't sometimes. Look at how some hurt and some brokenness isn't healed. It's hard to go back. And to look at, but forgiveness can always lead to healing. Let's look at our T there. Evaluate social media's ability to build or dismantle relationships. This is a wonderful piece to bring in terms of social emotional health in our schools, and just really the bullying that's going on beyond the traditional academic day, and the fact that we're using social media to often hurt people. So looking at how does it help me remain connected with people I care about and I love, but how does it also dismantle relationships around me? Our E, engineering. Design and construct systems that rebuild war-torn areas. Have students look at an area that is torn apart by war and have them come up with an idea. How can we start helping them, or how can they start rebuilding their society to be a more peaceful place? Arts. Apply forgiveness and mercy to 3 recognized pieces of art. So it doesn't have to be 3 pieces, but it's just an idea. Where do you see forgiveness in art? Or it could be in my piano playing. Maybe they take piano lessons or they dance. Where do you see that happening? And then I like this one with math. Assess God's mathematical equation regarding forgiveness, 7 times 70. And looking at that piece, what does that mean in terms of math and in terms of the idea of infinity? And that 7 times 70 ultimately is we forget it over and over again. Non-exhaustive. Those are some ways to approach that. I could help you again if you'd like some more ideas around that, or if you need me to break those down a little bit more, I certainly could do that for you via my email. So this is the third pillar that I really want to touch on here. Are we educating character or forming virtue? And I've been spending a lot of time speaking about this to our principals and to our teachers, that we do not educate character. And we have several character schools of excellence here in the Archdiocese of Chicago. I really want to see like cardinal schools of virtue. I'd like to see something similar to like a blue ribbon school of excellence. I want us to move away from the language of character education. We form virtue, habit, and firm dispositions that do good, that choose good, that lead to a virtuous life to become more like God, which we refer to as divinization. Become more like God there. So what is the difference? Why would I draw this piece out and think it's more important? One, I think it's becoming increasingly more and more that we articulate what makes us unique from our counterparts, charter schools, private schools, and public schools. Two, we have Catholic language around this that's deeply rich. We call it virtue formation. And so what is the primary difference I'm drawing here? One is that character education is kind of a horizontal approach, horizontal orientation to life. It's the idea that we develop good human beings who give back to the world. When we look at virtue formation, it's that we form good human beings who contribute to the world and make a difference, but we believe to become disciples and ultimately into the vertical realm in relationship with our God. So it goes beyond the horizontal to the vertical orientation, that we're being drawn directly into relationship with God. And I like the Latin here, formare. It's the act of giving form or shape, and I like to say with God. So we're working with God to give form or shape to the wonderful creations that He saw as necessary to be a part of this world. So we have a ton of virtues, and I've spent a little time translating a lot of character ed language into virtue language, and I just recently gave a presentation on this, and that's really important to me, because some of our virtues, the words, yes, sometimes they're hard to understand, but they're pretty powerful. So I just want to give a couple examples, and then I'm going to give you practical ways to ultimately implement idea of virtue formation in your schools. I've come up with various virtues like kindness, and kindness is a virtue, and I've connected each of the virtues to often like a media clip, so a video like this one's connected to Lollipop Moments, which is appropriate, but it's all about making a difference in one's life and not even realizing it. Then I connected to the life of a saint, so we got St. Elizabeth Ann Seton here, the foundress of parochial education. And then I connect it also to definitions and a quote. So we look at St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, our least action when done for God is precious to Him. So really looking at unpacking these, I do this for faculty and sometimes we can do it for kids, unpacking some of these virtues and what they mean. Justice, St. Thomas More, who's beheaded by King Henry VIII because he won't split from the Roman Catholic Church. And so I put a clip in here of St. Thomas More in The Man for All Seasons saying, I cannot act against my conscience. I deeply love the Roman Catholic Church. And so emphasizing that value of justice. And I love this quote, I do not care very much what men say of me, provided that God approves of me. What a great quote for young people to hear. It doesn't matter what other people think about you. What matters most is what your God thinks about you. And one last one. Oh, sorry. Diligence with St. John Bosco here. Fortitude and persisting, prayer, and then talking about a few of the quotes that ultimately reinforce what we're saying about courage and fortitude. I love this quote though, and I draw your attention to it. It is not enough to love the young. They must know that they are loved. I've met many teachers who love the young, but sometimes they don't know that they're loved. And I think that's really important that we communicate that. So here's some practical implications I've come up with. Why not integrate a Virtue of the Month program in your school? Each month, you focus on one virtue. That could roll out as you focus on one virtue accompanied by a saint. You could do it where each classroom is focusing on a particular virtue and saint per month. But really looking at ways you can integrate the virtue language into the classroom. Maybe every classroom has a virtue bulletin board, and we post pictures of people acting with virtue. This could also take form in a heroic virtue awards. You know, that we recognize individuals, these young people or our adults in the school who are acting like or embodying this virtue, but act like St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. So we give them the St. Elizabeth Ann Seton Award and say that they embody it. Tying virtue like we just did about through STREAM, using it in all of our lessons, creating maybe saint families, and this is you have 8th grade with 2nd grade and have them together and have them be mentors, the 8th graders to the 2nd graders. Mass and prayer themes, you know, ask Father to preach on the virtue you're working on for that month. Perhaps the virtue is even preached about on the weekend Mass, because there's a lot of concern that many of our parents don't go to church. Let's draw them in, that this week we're going to talk about our heroes, our children, and the virtues that they're embodying. Someone once said to me, if you ever want to get a parent to something, give their child an award. So I have to think to myself, let's give out some awards. Not everybody gets a trophy. Let's give out some awards so we can bring people to our schools, bring them to our masses, bring them to the critical realities of our life. I think we should use the language in our conversations with parents, at parent-teacher conferences, and our conversations with our students. How is not turning in your homework today not acting diligent? Let's talk about it. Let's have the conversation. Because I think we want to reinforce that, looking at that virtue-based restorative discipline that is often talked about and written about by Liz Lang. And I think these are important, Lynn Lang, sorry. These are important things to talk about. Virtue on the field, talking about virtue on the field, school assemblies, classroom and corridor names, all of these bulletin boards, as I said, really integrating virtue into the life of the school. And what I would say is, you know, at this moment, think what's one thing you as an administrator or you as a teacher that you can bring back to your school and begin to use. I just think our conversations need to always be contextualized within our faith. You know, we're having a challenging student, let's talk about it in light of our faith. So extracurricular activities, you know, many people, of course, prayed before games, and I think that's really wonderful. But do we celebrate behavior that is very Catholic on the field? Or we call it sportsmanship? Let's call it living our virtues, living our values. Do we use our sports, our events, for 5 minutes at the end of an event, or a game, or a theater production, or a show? Do we say, let's talk in 5 minutes, where did you see God in this game? Where did you see God in this meeting? You know, as simple as that. Encourage mass attendance. You know, say this week, you know, if it's grade school, let's say we would really want to highlight 8th grade parents, especially our boosters club, or those who are working, you know, with our corporal and spiritual works and mercy program, or those who are volunteer, and invite them to the weekend mass and encourage that. And I'd say ensure that every group in the school has a service focus, and what I would like to call it is the mercy in action, and I'll touch on that in a minute. That every group in the school is serving larger mission, that there is a piece of outreach to what they do. So what I'm trying to say is we got to go out and do these 3 pillars. We got to revision our religious instruction formation, our cross-curricular learning, our STREAM, and our virtue formation, from character ed to virtue formation. So I love this quote because we began with that idea. Are we inviting kids and parents to a funeral? Are we inviting them to the party of the gospel? And Blessed Columba Marmion, who is a monk and founder of an abbey actually here in Illinois, says joy is the echo of God's life within us. Do we exude that joy? I think we have to ask ourselves that. We have to love the gospel in Jesus Christ revealed in our church if we want our young and our faculty and our staffs to love it. So to finalize, what I want to kind of encapsulate here is I've been doing a lot around trying to change the language in the Catholic schools here in the Archdiocese of Chicago, and we talked a little bit about this. But moving it from STEM, STEAM to STREAM, religion at the center, Having our teachers move away from talk about teaching as a profession, but as a vocation, a deep calling from God. God saw they were needed in this world amidst the great beauty and galaxies that exist. Shifting from character education to virtue formation, that horizontal and vertical approach, and integrating and implementing that in our schools. Moving away from service learning to the idea of mercy in action with reflection and prayer. Touching on how we live in the corporal and spiritual works of mercy. And then finally, this is something I've been saying a lot. We don't pray sometimes, we pray always. And what do I mean by this? We should pray every time we meet with a faculty member, every time we meet with a parent, anytime we engage in any kind of meeting. Prayer should be the context. And so I just want to touch on this with parents. Often we can sometimes have contentious relationship with parents, or there can be disagreements. If you ever want to root the conversation you're going to have, especially a challenging conversation, in why you're doing and why you are in partnership together, in covenants, begin with prayer. It really roots it and says, wait, this is what we're about. And so as you end the prayer and you say, may God, you be with us as we discuss the wonderful gift of who Johnny is and how we can help him further grow. That really helps give a greater context. And I can tell you, I did it at the beginning of every parent-teacher conference. And if you're not comfortable with that or at the meeting, always just have a prayer there, but rooted in prayer. So this is my contact information, and I feel like I've given you a lot, and I've kind of stuffed in here a lot. And again, I am certainly more than willing to have correspondence around other ideas and entertain questions, because I feel like I possess just a piece of information or truth around this, but each one of you possess so much that if together we share it, we truly can create fiery kiln Catholic schools that really, really create strong disciples who change and transform the world and who love with a godly love. So this is my information, and again, I can't help but thank you. I humbly offer this, and if there's any way that I can support you in your ministry and mission as an administrator, a teacher, a staff member, please always feel welcome to reach out to me. I'll turn it over to Andrea.
Thank you, Robert. And we do have a few questions. Someone had asked about enculturation. Any tips on enculturation when your school or parish seems to lack diversity?
So that is definitely, I think, a huge challenge for schools that lack diversity. But yet there is diversity in that school and in that parish around, I'm sure, some economic diversity, unless it's a very affluent parish school. There is some diversity around how people learn, what people think, what people believe. So I think you start that conversation around the differences. Yes, there's a lot of similarities, but what makes us different and unique? Because we want to get people to a place where they see we really want to embrace diversity and we would like to be more diverse, that we become too comfortable in what we know. And so I think that's one piece. I also think really exposing people to a diversity of liturgical music, a diversity of preaching styles, a diversity of languages within the Mass and within the school. So bringing that to them, even though there can be resistance. So those are some ideas I would put out there around it. But I do think the greatest expression of God is diversity. And if we want to see the magnificent and multiplicity of ways that God reveals God's self, we need to invite that diversity in.
Well put. This is another one related to the idea of pushback or resistance. How do you balance the use of technology with concerns that some may have about inappropriate content online or student privacy and safety?
So coming from a one-to-one school, we certainly had to face that issue. And there were a couple things we did. First of all, we had parents and students sign basically contracts with us that if they would not access anything inappropriate on the internet, and if something inappropriate happened and they were a party to it, that they would reveal that to us. Secondly, there are numerous filter systems as ways that we use to monitor what our students were looking at while they were on technology, and to make sure that the teacher was aware, because there is technology out there to be able to see what is each kid doing on their one-to-one device, and coming to understand that. But I would like to tie this back to the virtue formation. What does it mean to live a virtuous life as a net citizen, or net citizen, however they say it, netizens? How are we going to teach our children ultimately that you must be responsible and virtuous in your interactions and what you look at on the internet? If something comes to you that's inappropriate, you need to share that with us. But it's very important. I think that's going to be huge in our global citizen world.
Thank you for that. And one final question before we wrap up. How can we partner schools and parishes to bring more students into the school and more families into our parishes?
So I think the partner between the first part was parish and school. Am I correct, Andrea?
Yes.
Okay. Parish and school, I think we need to move beyond this divide between there's the parish, the school, the RE program, the Catholic school. And I believe one way to do this is to begin to even pilot joint initiatives if it's around works of mercy, if it's around donations or collections, if it's around key learnings. So that what's happening in the classroom is also happening in the parish. And then bringing those groups together around those initiatives. I know that parents are very busy. I know that people are extremely busy. But there's got to be a way to bring them in dialogue with one another. And we have to help people do that while letting go of their own ego, in terms of religious ed or the Catholic school. But in order to increase attendance at our Mass, we're going to have to become, as Paul calls us, one body, not separate entities on a certain geographical location. So that's just one idea. I think in terms of drawing people into our parishes, we have to begin to think about maybe less traditional ways of evangelization and start thinking about how do we share our faith with people? How are we reaching out to people in our community, inviting them in? How are we hospitable? How are we assessing what people are looking for in our response to it? Because I believe there's a deep desire out there, but I believe there's something that we need to be doing to reach out to those individuals. And I know one is hospitality and invitation. Catholics often haven't been real good at hospitality, invitation, and sharing our faith. And I think that's going to be three, especially that last one, sharing how much we've experienced the love of Christ in our life in and through the church.
Well, thank you so much. That concludes our time for questions today. And if you've not done so already, you can download your certificate of attendance for the webinar in the handout section of the GoToWebinar control panel. If we didn't get to your question today, please feel free to reach out to Robert directly with the information that's on the screen. I want to thank our sponsor, Sadlier, for this webinar, and our audience for their participation, and especially Robert for your expertise and everything that you've shared with us this evening. Did you have any final words for our audience before we wrap?
I just would like to say to our administrators and our teachers that you are deeply in my thoughts and prayers. You do very hard work every day for God. And know that you're my thoughts and prayers. But I believe if we do this together, if we do this mission and ministry together, our schools will remain vital and vibrant well beyond the 21st century. So know that you're my thoughts and prayers. And if there's any way I can assist and support you in my role, please do not hesitate to reach out to me.
Thank you so much, Robert. And as we conclude, I invite all of you to visit our website at ncea.org to see listings for both upcoming webinars and other professional development activities. And as a reminder, I will be sending you this recorded webinar and the presentation materials via email tomorrow. So be on the lookout for that in the next 24 hours. Thank you all again, and may you enjoy a blessed evening.